A former U.S. State Department senior policy advisor and on the Israeli-Palestinian negotiating team, and is now a senior fellow at the Johns Hopkins Merrill Center for Strategic and International Studies. So welcome, Laura. Now, this was supposed to be the last exchange of hostages and Palestinian prisoners as phase one of the deal, but now we're seeing that Israel has delayed the release of over 600 Palestinian prisoners. So how do you see impact getting to stage two of the deal?
Yes, indeed. Steve Witkoff, President Trump's special Middle East envoy, was meeting tonight with Ron Dermer, Prime Minister Netanyahu's political negotiator. And what Witkoff said is that he was hoping that the, quote, goodwill from this phase one would kind of usher the way into phase two. Obviously, today was anything but goodwill. It was, ill will and humiliation for Israel. One of the hostages who was released, according to his father, was ordered by the Hamas gunman to kiss one of his captors on the head before he was released. And here's the thing about the Middle East, and it's also true of President Trump. You can't have this kind of moment of revealed weakness in order to gain and hold respect. And so I think that Netanyahu, especially on the day when they were supposed to release the largest number of prisoners, Palestinian prisoners, including 100 who've been convicted on murder, I think he felt like he just had to do something in some kind of reaction. Otherwise, in this kind of ugliest of arm wrestles as we approach phase two, he would feel like he was losing the upper hand.
So, Laura, building on that, are the two sides, in fact, ready for stage two of the deal? And this is going to get a whole lot more complicated now because it foresees the end to the war and also Israel withdrawing troops from Gaza. So how is that deal looking now? How fragile do you think it is?
Well, ready or not, here it comes. I do believe we'll go forward. I'm not sure in what form, if it'll be as negotiated under President Biden before he left office. But I do think it will happen for several reasons. First and foremost is that what we're talking about now are Israeli soldiers who are being held. And if there's anything, if there's one credo, every Israeli will tell you that they're sort of the secret in their sauce, as one combat pilot told me, was that, no man left behind. So Israel is going to do what it takes to bring those final hostages home. And secondly, again, President Trump, totally different approach than President Biden. America first, and there are Americans still being held, both deceased Americans in terms of their bodies, and then one living American. His name is Eden Alexander. And if there's just one name that you can think of that might sort of inspire and motivate, the United States to stand even stronger with Israel, that's Eden Alexander.
And speaking of the U.S., Laura, I mean, there's a big question about pressure on Israel. We saw President Donald Trump putting a lot of pressure on Israel's Netanyahu to enforce phase one of the deal. But then just some 24 hours or so ago, he was saying that actually he's fine with whatever Israel decides to do, whether it decides to go to phase two or continue with the war. So this is quite confusing now where U.S. sits in all of this. What do you make of that, and how could that impact the lack of this pressure, perhaps, in getting to phase two?
Yeah, well, U.S. leverage in the region is always a fascinating and in some ways the most important question. And what I worry about is not even so much about the pressure Trump can put on Netanyahu, because it's clear that Netanyahu is very eager to please President Trump, but it's what kind of respect and leverage the president of the United States has in the Arab world. Because first with his Gaza, takeover plan, and then with that high noon deadline that he set to release all the hostages last week, he didn't follow through on either of those threats. Hamas said, your words have no meaning. And what that means is that there's no consequences. Without that, there's no leverage. And the U.S. is going to very quickly lose their ability to impact events on the ground. So I think we just have to wait and see. What does it mean when the U.S. envoy for hostages says that it will be, quote, total annihilation of Hamas if they don't release the hostages? There's got to be some bite in that bark. Otherwise, they're going to be very limited.
And there's the big question about how Arab leaders react to Trump's proposals for Gaza. He says he wants to make it the Riviera of the Middle East, but that would involve displacing over 2 million Palestinians. The Arab leaders, they haven't been supporting this idea, and they met in Saudi Arabia to discuss a counter proposal. Do we have any idea of what that could look like, or what are you expecting to come from those types of talks?
Well, it'll look like what we always thought it would look like. In other words, we're back to square one where we started, which is a Palestinian leadership that isn't associated with Hamas, perhaps a kind of reconstituted Palestinian Authority, financed chiefly by the Gulf, but also by other countries who support, kind of a reintegration of Palestinians back into their home, what many consider their homeland, which is Gaza. But the unfortunate thing is that we've kind of lost a lot of our bargaining power along the way. President Trump has backed off. Look, he's flexible. You could call it a flip-flop. But he is saying, I'm surprised that they weren't willing to listen to me. We give them billions of dollars of aid, but so be it. I'll just sort of sit back and watch. So I think that at least he isn't doubling down. He's sort of focusing his firepower right now on Ukraine and forcing a ceasefire there in a kind of a reverse of what President Biden was very much pressuring Netanyahu to reach a ceasefire and hands off with Zelensky. Here we're seeing quite the opposite.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much to Laura Blumenfeld of Johns Hopkins Merrill Center for Strategic and International Studies.
Thank you.